show. Today we've got Michael Kirby, who holds the distinction of being Australia's longest-serving judge, and as a gay man, he's a great believer in justice and equality. His biography, A Private Life, is a series of stories from his career, from life outside of work, and the 30-year relationship with his partner, and Michael will join us this morning. Retired High Court Judge Michael Kirby was the longest-serving judge in Australian history, and although a judge's job is to interpret the law, he is still a product of his life and experiences, and it's with that in mind that the former justice decided to write his book, A Private Life. Please welcome Michael Kirby to the couch. Michael, tell us, what was the hardest part about writing this book for you?
Well, deciding to write it. I mean, I was a bit sceptical that there would be an interest in the private life of a judge, but Allen and Unwin, who are the publishers, thought there would be, and I think on reflection it's a good thing to tell Australia what it's like growing up gay, because most people in Australia are kind people and understanding, and the more that is done, the more people will understand the nature of it.
Was it always that way in your experience, that there was kindness and acceptance?
Yes, in my family I was always surrounded by love. I had young parents and wonderful siblings, and so I had support. But a lot of people, particularly I think in regional and rural Australia, sometimes out there it still is difficult. And of course in the big world it's a big problem. So
it was a problem for you though, wasn't it, Michael? I mean, you did. I know, growing up in the 50s and 60s, that I didn't know anything about gay people because it was never talked about. Although when I got into theatre in the 70s, I realised that a lot of people that I'd known in my life were homosexual, but had never spoken about it in that time. So was that difficult for you in that time?
Well, you knew the rules. See, the rules were don't ask, don't tell. If you said nothing, then OK, that was the compact, and you would be left alone. But what began to upset people was that gay people were not willing really to go along with that. And it was a bit like white Australia. How did we overcome white Australia? We overcame it because more and more people in the suburbs met Asian Australians and found that many of them were brighter than they were, and also some of the hard working, and some of them were just as boring as the rest of them. And that was what got us over that attitude of the past, and I think this book is maybe a contribution to that in respect of gay people.
It is. It gives us a good historical perspective, and there are other issues that you talk about besides the gay thing, but I did want to show our viewers a photo of you with your life partner, Johan.
Oh, yes.
41 years together. It is such a beautiful element of the book, the way that you two relied on each other. And one thing that you discussed was how he was sort of quietly behind you, but nobody ever got to meet him for quite a long time. Do you remember when the door started to open for Johan?
Basically, to be truthful, it was when the AIDS epidemic came along, because in the 80s we were going to funerals, we were going to funerals of very dear friends, and in comparison to the enormity of the AIDS epidemic, our little story seemed terribly insignificant. So that that's when gradually, that was sort of code language for sexuality, and then in the 90s we were much more open, and I think that was good for everybody. It was good for the High Court, it was good for people watching, and it's part of the way we've made progress in Australia, and I hope we continue to make progress.
What about when Senator Bill Heffernan had a go at you?
Not a nice week.
So if you remember this, it was in 2002, and this guy really had a go at you in Parliament about soliciting for underage boys using
government resources.
Government resources. I remember that at the time because it was all over the front page of the newspapers, and I couldn't help but think, why did he do it if it wasn't true?
Well, you'd have to ask him about that.
Did he believe it though?
Well, I don't know. I can't go there. My own view was, basically, he made a mistake, he apologised, he lost his job as a minister, he always comes up whenever I see him, tries to shake hands. I always shake hands. My partner, who's Dutch, you know, they're very in your face, and he doesn't. But everybody makes mistakes in life, but it wasn't a good thing, and it really was part, I think, of the attitudes that people get very early in life, and we've got to get over it. It's not a big deal. It's like left-handedness, and people have just got to grow up.
What are your views on gay marriage?
Well, we've had many talks about this. We're not sure we would get married because after such a long time, 4 decades...
You might wreck it, do you think, over 41 years?
Exactly. Yes. I mean, you don't want to interfere with the integers in the relationship, but it should be there. Of course it should be there. It's a legal status. You wouldn't force churches or religions to marry people in mosques and temples if they're not comfortable with doing that, but as a legal status, given that now 2/3 of Australians get married with marriage celebrants, it ought to be available to people, and religion is a private matter, and that should be kept to yourself and not interfering with other people's civil and legal rights.
You're so intelligent and so accomplished, and I really loved your book. Beautiful. But one part I really loved was that you're not too accomplished to be a fan of James Dean.
Oh, absolutely. Though that was a bit weird, didn't you think?
I love it because
24 times, 24 times. Well, Colin, that basically was what was forced on you in those days. I mean, to have any relationship was criminal, and therefore you sort of lived in a sublimated world, and that's what was done to people. And there are still, unfortunately, there are churches and others who will say, well, you've got to be celibate. But celibacy doesn't come natural to human beings, and therefore...
So can I just explain, just for people who don't know the story, you watched East of Eden, the James Dean film, 24 times at least.
Sorry, did you have to say that?
And by sublimated, I think you meant you sort of had a crush on James Dean, and it was a way of...
so did I.
You could put it that way.
Exactly.
Yes.
He was a hunk, wasn't he?
He was, but he was also a very sensitive sort of person, and it turns out I think he was gay or bisexual, and so maybe my gaydar was working.
We would like to thank you so much for coming in. It's been such an honour to meet you, and we hope that the book is really successful and helps people, particularly young men and young women that are struggling with this. So thank you so much for coming in. Would you please thank you? The details of Michael's book, A Private Life, are on the Circle's website, and we will see you all after this.